Edmonton, St. Albert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly a delight for me to add my comments at second reading to Bill C-31, eliminating entitlements for prisoners, and I will confine my remarks, Mr. Speaker, to the things that are actually in the bill, not wild speculation of the bill as the previous speaker did. I'd certainly like to commend the Minister of Human Resources and Skill Development, firstly, for sponsoring this important piece of legislation and also for her excellent speech that we heard in this House just over one hour ago. Mr. Speaker, the Eliminating Entitlements for Prisoners Act, C-31, is indeed a very important bill. It is important for taxpayers and for victims of crime, and it is important for principles of fairness. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister has noted, our Conservative government is strongly committed to ensuring fairness for hard-working taxpayers. Ordinary, everyday, tax-paying Canadians deserve fairness from their government, and this government intends to deliver fairness to those taxpayers. The government provides many services, and it also provides help. That help comes from the tax dollars that the government collects. It comes out of the pockets of everyday, hard-working, tax-paying Canadians, the Tim Hortons crowd, if you will. Mr. Speaker, income security helps one of those things that the government provides, and it is important. And it's important, Mr. Speaker, that the government provide that help fairly to Canadians, since I have said that money belongs to Canadians. It does not belong to the government. It is the taxpayers' money. So when we're talking about fairness, in this case, we're talking about treating hard-working and law-abiding Canadians and their tax dollars fairly. We're also doing what we can to ensure that the victims of crime and their families are not faced with more pain. These victims should not have to watch the painful sight of their money and their community's money going into the pockets of the very criminals who hurt them and who hurt their families. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has said it. The Minister has said it. Many of my colleagues, including myself, have said it. We will continue to put victims and taxpayers first. We will put victims ahead of criminals. Our government believes that Canadians who work hard, contribute to the system, and play by the rules deserve government benefits such as old age security. This is what our government believes, and I think it is what Canadians expect. I certainly know from hearing from many of my constituents, by letter, by email, by phone call, that is what my constituents expect. Mr. Speaker, it is obviously wrong and obviously unfair that prisoners who have broken our laws, who have broken our society's trust, receive the same taxpayer-funded benefits as law-abiding Canadians. I'm perplexed as to how it could be otherwise, Mr. Speaker. I believe this, government believes it, my constituents believe it, and I'm very happy to say that the Prime Minister believes this, as do all Canadians. This bill, C-31, which I welcome, will ensure that criminals, those who have broken trust and broken our laws and made victims of their fellow Canadians, will no longer receive taxpayer-funded benefits while they are serving time in jail. Right now, without this change to our laws, child murderers such as Clifford Olson are receiving these government benefits. Mr. Olson receives government-sponsored benefits, notwithstanding that he brutally murdered 11 children. As the Minister told this House, in a few short years, Paul Bernardo similarly will be entitled to these benefits. Someday, and in the not-too-distant future, so will Mr. Robert Picton. This cannot happen, Mr. Speaker, and that's why it is incumbent upon this House to act and to act expeditiously. These criminals, these murderers, to take just a small example, brutally and heartlessly took the lives of people living in their communities. Many of those lives were young, and they were shattered and forever diminished the lives of those families who had members torn from them. Mr. Speaker, the criminals such as these should easily, blithely receive the same quote-unquote assistance from our federal government is simply wrong. The assistance that the government provides is intended to help older Canadians with their costs of living after many decades of work and much contribution to their families, to their communities, and to their country. Prisoners, on the other hand, criminals who have broken our laws so seriously that they are incarcerated in federal institutions and provincial prisons for long periods of time, do not need extra cost of living assistance. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because they already have their cost of living paid for by the taxpayers of this country. The same taxpayers from whom these criminals have taken so much. This is offensive and outrageous to our government and to our Prime Minister and to our Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development. It's also offensive to Canadians all across the country. That is why I believe there's wide support for this bill, at least certainly at second reading. We've heard from members on both sides of this House. It appears that this bill is going to be unanimously or near unanimously favored when it comes to a vote, because it is offensive to all Canadians. As soon as this shockingly unfair and unjust situation was discovered, the Prime Minister asked the Minister to take action as quickly as possible to put a stop to incarcerated criminals receiving old age security and guaranteed income supplement benefits, or the abbreviations that they are more commonly known by, the OAS and the GIS. And it is our government's intention and it is our government's commitment and our goal to fix this. Our government has shown that when we make a promise to Canadians, we take action. We follow through on our commitments to Canadians, and that's why the Minister acted with the haste that she did. We're going to remedy this inequity. We're moving quickly to do so, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because that is what Canadians want. That is what Canadians demand. That is exactly what my constituents want, and it is happening. It is happening here today. Today is part of that process, a process that I hope will continue to move swiftly. If I may, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to touch on the main details of the bill. I think the intention is good, and the details are relatively straightforward. A prisoner's needs, as you know, Mr. Speaker, such as food and shelter and their standard of living, such as it is, are already met and paid for by public funds. That is, by hard-working Canadian taxpayers. That has a cost, and we pay it. We pay it voluntarily. We pay it gladly. What I am not okay with, and what my constituents are not okay with, is the provision of benefits that are meant for law-abiding, hard-working seniors to instead go to prisoners. Canadian taxpayers should not be paying double for income support through OAS and GIS benefits to these same prisoners. It is grossly unfair, Mr. Speaker, to force law-abiding Canadian taxpayers to pay for the criminals twice. Firstly, by paying for the room and board, and secondly, by paying for their supplemental benefits, the OAS and the GIS. Once passed, this bill will terminate OAS and GIS benefits for federal prisoners. The federal government would then work with the provinces and the territories to stop these benefits for prisoners who are serving 90 days or more in a provincial or territorial institution. I hope that all of the provinces and territories respond as favorably as the Minister to this Minister and to this legislation as the British Columbia government has. I understand British Columbia is already on board, and once this legislation is passed, it similarly will apply to provincial prisoners in the BC detention system. I also hope that all of my colleagues here in this House will respond positively and will respond quickly. Our constituents, Mr. Speaker, who are our bosses, our fellow tax-paying Canadians, expect us to use their hard-earned tax dollars fairly, responsibly, and prudently. And they have told us that, loudly and clearly. I'm sure all members of this House have received feedback with respect to this bill after it was announced last spring. And certainly, speaking on behalf of the considerable correspondence that I received, it was universally positive. In fact,